Ma'am, stop what you're doing and show me your ID, now.
I'm on my own property. You have no probable cause to detain me.
Refusing to identify as obstruction. Turn around.
Officer, you're about to cross a federal line you cannot walk back from.
Oh my.
Badge is right here. You really want to keep pushing this?
Officer Mark Reynolds had been with the Phoenix Police Department for 8 years. He was 34 years old, a transfer from a smaller department in the Midwest, and he carried himself with an air of authority that often crossed the line into arrogance. It was a scorching Tuesday afternoon in Arizona, one of those days where the heat radiates off the asphalt in shimmering waves. Reynolds was already irritable. His air conditioning was struggling, and he had been chasing calls all morning with no results. Dispatch had broadcast a call regarding a residential burglary 3 streets over. The description provided by the homeowner was frantic and patchy at best. Hispanic female, maybe late 30s, wearing casual clothes, fled on foot. That was it. No description of specific facial features, no shoe type, no height or weight specifics. Just a generic description that could apply to tens of thousands of women in the Phoenix metro area. Reynolds cruised through the subdivision, his eyes scanning every yard. He passed a landscaping crew. He passed a woman jogging with headphones. He passed a teenager walking home from school. None of them piqued his interest. He was looking for someone who looked suspicious, a subjective metric that usually relied more on his personal biases than police training. Then he saw Elena Rodriguez. Elena was 42 years old, though she looked 10 years younger. She was standing in the driveway of her ranch-style home, holding a microfiber cloth and a bottle of spray wax. She was lovingly polishing the chrome bumper of her vintage Mustang, a restoration project she had finished 2 years prior. She was wearing athletic shorts and a sleeveless top to beat the heat, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Elena was technically on vacation. She had just returned from a 6-month deployment in Eastern Europe working on counterintelligence operations that involved tracking illicit financial flows funding extremist groups. She was a high-ranking analyst and field operative for the Central Intelligence Agency. She spoke 4 languages fluently, was trained in Krav Maga, and possessed a security clearance that required a polygraph test every 6 months. She handled secrets that could topple foreign governments. Today, however, her only mission was to get the dust off her car and relax. Reynolds pulled his cruiser aggressively to the curb, partially blocking her driveway. He did not run the license plate of the Mustang. He did not check the property records to see who owned the home. He did not radio dispatch to state he was making contact with a potential suspect. He simply saw a Hispanic woman in the general vicinity of a burglary and decided the math worked out. Elena paused mid-wipe as the officer approached. She placed the cloth on the hood of the car, careful not to scratch the paint. She wasn't alarmed initially. Her first thought was that perhaps a neighbor needed help or there was a wild animal sighting in the area, which was common near the desert preserves. She was wrong. The moment Reynolds opened his mouth, the dynamic shifted. There was no, "Good afternoon." No. "Ma'am, may I speak with you for a moment?" It was immediate command presence. He barked orders, expecting instant submission. Elena stood her ground. Her training at the farm, the CIA's training facility in Virginia, had prepared her for interrogations by hostile foreign intelligence services. She had been questioned in windowless rooms in unstable nations. A rude municipal police officer in her own driveway was not going to intimidate her. She kept her posture relaxed, but ready, her voice even. "What seems to be the issue?" she had asked. It was a question any homeowner had the right to ask. Reynolds interpreted her calmness as insolence. In his worldview, an innocent person would be nervous, apologetic, and eager to please. They would scramble to produce ID. They would let him search whatever he wanted just to prove they were good citizens. Elena's refusal to answer his questions without a valid reason triggered his ego. He saw her knowledge of her rights not as intelligence but as a challenge to his power. The circular logic took hold. If she is refusing to show ID, she must be the burglar. Because she is the burglar, I need to arrest her. To arrest her, I need her ID. But Elena was not a burglar. She was a federal asset who had spent the last decade protecting the very constitutional rights Reynolds was currently trampling. She knew the Fourth Amendment intimately. She knew that in a Terry stop, the officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity was afoot to detain her. Standing in a driveway, washing a car, did not meet that threshold. Type, not a chance, in the comments if you think Officer Reynolds should have de-escalated the situation right here. Elena tried to offer him an off-ramp. She clearly stated she was on her own property. She pointed out the vagueness of his description. She gave him every opportunity to realize he was making a mistake without explicitly revealing her classified status. She did not scream, "I am with the CIA," because quiet professionals do not broadcast their affiliations in public streets. She expected him to do basic police work. Reynolds refused. He decided that he was going to win this interaction. He reached for his cuffs. "I am detaining you for obstruction of justice and failure to identify," Reynolds declared, spinning her around. Elena did not resist. She knew the physics of the situation. Fighting a police officer physically, even when he is wrong, is a recipe for injury or death. She also knew that the real battle would be fought in a courtroom where pen and paper were deadlier than a Glock. The handcuffs clicked. Elena looked at the neighbors who had begun to gather. Mr. Henderson, a retired dentist from across the street, was watching with his mouth open. A teenager walking a dog 2 houses down had her phone out recording the scene. "Officer," Elena said, her voice dropping to a register that was dangerously low, "you are making a catastrophic error in judgment. I strongly suggest you contact your watch commander immediately." "You can tell it to the judge," Reynolds snapped, guiding her toward the back of his cruiser. He shoved her into the back seat. The plastic was hot, the space cramped. Elena shifted to alleviate the pressure on her wrists. She closed her eyes for a moment, cataloging the events, memorizing the timestamps, the dialogue, the officer's badge number, 4922. The drive to the precinct was short, about 15 minutes. Reynolds played the radio loud, perhaps to drown out any second thoughts he might be having, or perhaps to punish his prisoner further. Elena said nothing. She sat in absolute silence, staring at the back of his head, formulating the sequence of calls she would make once she had access to a phone. When they arrived at the precinct, Reynolds paraded her in. He walked with a strut, convinced he had caught a burglar who was plaguing the neighborhood. He handed her off to the booking sergeant, a man named David Chen, who had been behind the desk for 20 years. "Burglary suspect?" Chen asked, eyeing Elena, who looked nothing like the typical drug-addled thieves they usually processed. "Obstruction," Reynolds said proudly. "Matched the description of the burglary suspect, refused to ID, resisted detention." Chen sighed and began the process. "Name?" "Elena Maria Rodriguez," she said clearly. "Date of birth?" She gave it. "Personal effects," Chen muttered. He began cataloging what was in her pockets. She had no wallet on her, it was in the house. But she did have a small, sleek leather case clipped to her waistband, which Reynolds had missed during his hasty pat-down because it sat flush against her back. Chen opened the leather case. He stopped. Inside was not a driver's license. It was a federal credential. The heavy laminated card bore the seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. It had a gold chip, a holographic overlay, and a clearance code that Chen had never seen before. Level 5. No restriction. Chen looked at the card. He looked at Elena. He looked at Reynolds, who was filling out paperwork at a nearby desk, oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in the room. "Reynolds," Chen said, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes, Sarge." Did you look at her ID?" "She refused to give it to me. That's why she's here." Chen slid the credentials across the counter. "You need to look at this. Right now." Reynolds walked over, annoyed. He looked down at the badge. He blinked. He picked it up, turning it over, looking for the word fake or novelty. It was heavy. It felt real. "This is fake." Reynolds scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "She bought this online." "I don't think so," Elena said from the bench. Her voice carried across the room. "Please call the number on the back of the card, extension 440. Ask for Director of Operations Western Region. His name is Cartwright." Sergeant Chen didn't wait for Reynolds' permission. He picked up the phone. He dialed the number. The conversation lasted less than 60 seconds. Chen's face went from pale to ghostly white. He hung up the phone very gently as if slamming it might cause an explosion. "Reynolds," Chen whispered. "The special agent in charge of the FBI Phoenix field office is on his way here. The CIA liaison is on the phone with the chief. You need to uncuff her, now." Reynolds froze. The realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just arrested a citizen. He had arrested a high-level federal operative. "Bring her to the interview room," Chen barked, losing his patience. "Do not put her in a cell. Get her water. Get her whatever she wants." Captain Sarah Miller, the precinct commander, stormed down the hallway 3 minutes later. She had been briefed by the chief, who had been screamed at by a furious attorney from the Department of Justice. Miller walked into the interview room. Elena was sitting at the table, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had left red indentations. "Miss Rodriguez." Captain Miller began breathless. "I am Captain Miller. I want to personally apologize for this terrible misunderstanding. You are free to go immediately. We can arrange a transport for you, or—" Elena held up a hand. "Captain, this was not a misunderstanding. This was a violation of civil rights based on a lazy, biased profile. Your officer ignored the law because he didn't like my tone. I want his body camera footage secured. I want the dispatch logs. I want the incident report. And I will not be leaving until my supervisor arrives to document my release." Miller swallowed hard. "Understood. We will secure all evidence." 20 minutes later, 2 men in dark suits walked into the station. They didn't speak to the desk sergeant. They walked straight to the captain's office. They were Elena's counterparts from the local FBI field office acting as proxies for her agency. The meeting was short. When they emerged with Elena, the station was silent. Every officer knew something massive was happening. Reynolds was called into the captain's office as Elena walked out the front door. He was stripped of his badge and gun on the spot and placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. He walked out the back door, dazed, still muttering that he had probable cause. The fallout was swift and brutal. Elena Rodriguez did not need the money, but she sued the city anyway. She hired a shark of a civil rights attorney who filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging Fourth Amendment violations, false arrest, and racial profiling. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was humiliating for the department. The internal affairs investigation revealed that Reynolds had a history of stopping Hispanic residents at a rate 3 times higher than his peers. He often cited suspicious behavior that amounted to nothing more than existing in public spaces. The body camera footage was the nail in the coffin. It showed a calm, articulate woman on her own property being treated like a dangerous felon within seconds of contact. It showed Reynolds refusing to listen, refusing to investigate, and choosing escalation over reason. The city attorney watched the footage once and told the mayor, "Cut the check." 6 months after the incident, the city of Phoenix settled with Elena Rodriguez for $1.2 million. As part of the settlement, the police department was forced to overhaul its Terry Stop policies requiring officers to document specific articulable facts before detaining anyone. They also had to implement mandatory bias training that was vetted by the Department of Justice. Mark Reynolds was fired. His termination letter cited gross incompetence, violation of department policy, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He attempted to appeal through the police union, but when the union reps saw the footage and the federal heat coming down on the department, they quietly advised him to walk away. Reynolds moved to Nevada. He couldn't get hired in law enforcement again. His name was flagged in every national database. He eventually found work as a night shift supervisor for a private trucking security firm, earning a fraction of his former salary. He spent his breaks on online forums complaining about how political correctness had ruined the police force, never accepting that his own arrogance was the architect of his downfall. Elena used the settlement money to start a scholarship fund for minority students entering the fields of law and criminal justice. She continued her work with the agency, eventually moving to a desk position in Washington, D.C., where she helped shape policy on domestic intelligence sharing. She never forgot the look on Reynolds' face when the handcuffs went on. It was the look of a man who believed his power was absolute. And she never forgot the look on his face when he saw her badge. It was the look of a man realizing that power is a privilege, not a right, and it can be taken away in a heartbeat. "Do you think the settlement was enough? Or should Officer Reynolds have faced criminal charges for false imprisonment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The lesson here is profound and applies to everyone, not just law enforcement. It is the danger of assumption versus verification. Officer Reynolds assumed he knew the truth based on a surface-level glance. He assumed that his authority made him right. He substituted his bias for actual investigation. In any profession, whether you are a doctor, a mechanic, a manager, or a police officer, the moment you stop asking questions and start assuming you know the answer, you become a liability. True competence is not about knowing everything. It is about the humility to verify the facts before you act. When we let our ego drive our decisions, we don't just risk being wrong, we risk destroying lives, including our own.